Our attitudes are easily understood, having grown up, having come to consciousness in the first 5 years of this decade, years dominated by men with dreams, men in the civil rights movement, the Peace Corps, the space program.
That is Hillary Rodham speaking at her college in 1969, which is not 5 years into the decade. Notice the feminist language? She talked about men's dreams dominating the decade. She didn't have to pull the gender card. The Equal Pay Act was in since 1963. She has always seen men as the haves and women as the have-nots.
So we arrived at Wellesley, and we found, as all of us have found, that there was a gap between expectation and realities.
By 1969, women got to vote, women got to go to school, women got equal pay for equal work. But here, Hillary Rodham was still talking about a gap. And of course, there is going to be a gap between expectations and reality because life happens. But since even as far back as 1963, there is no wage gap, there is no dream gap, there is no possibility gap, or gender gap of any sort, except for personal preference. It has nothing to do with discrimination. But feminists really need that gap there because otherwise they have nothing to fight for, which is true. They have nothing to fight for, but they just don't want to give it up. They want to keep fighting a phantom fight against a non-existent discriminatory gap.
But it wasn't a discouraging gap, and it didn't turn us, into cynical, bitter old women at the age of 18.
Well, maybe not yet, but given some time, some of them might have grown out of the feminism. Others probably became professional special snowflakes. Regardless of whether or not her fatalistic feminism made her bitter by the age of 18, Hillary still admired Margaret Sanger. And in this video, she answers a few questions in her defense of that position.
Madam Secretary, in receiving Planned Parenthood's founder Margaret Sanger's award in Houston on March 27th, you said that you were, quote, in awe of Margaret Sanger. You said that Sanger's life and leadership was one of the most transformational in the entire history of the human race, and that Sanger's work both here and abroad was not done, quote unquote. With all due respect, Madam Secretary, Sanger's legacy was indeed transformational, but not for the better if one happens to be poor, disenfranchised, weak, disabled, a person of color, an unborn child, or among the many so-called undesirables Sanger would exclude and exterminate from the human race. Sanger's prolific writings drip with contempt for those she considers to be unfit to live. I've actually read many of Sanger's articles and her books. Sanger was an unapologetic eugenicist.
Your remarks last month when you called Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, a person whom you enormously admire, were stunning to me. Margaret Sanger clearly embraced bigotry and racism. She advocated for the elimination of the disabled, the downtrodden, and the black child. In one of her writings, she said, "Today, eugenics is suggested by the most diverse minds as the most adequate and thorough avenue to the solution of racial, political, and social problems."
Congressman, let me say with respect to your comments about Margaret Sanger, I admire Thomas Jefferson. I admire his words and his leadership, and I deplore his unrepentant slaveholding.
Lots of other people owned slaves besides Thomas Jefferson, including many other U.S. presidents. The only reason Hillary picked on Thomas Jefferson here is because of the stupid Sally Hemmings hoax. Yes, it's a hoax. Thomas Jefferson did not have Sally Hemmings as a concubine slave, and she did not give birth to his children. Sally Hemmings had children, but they were by other people, not by Thomas Jefferson. This hoax was started by James Callender, who was mad at Thomas Jefferson for not paying up the money that he owed him fast enough. This ugly smear of Thomas Jefferson's character came into popularity with the Clintons when Bill Clinton had his affair with Lewinsky and got found out. And other women came forward, revealing that Clinton had other affairs with them. Jefferson, like Washington, was not unrepentant as a slave owner. Both men freed slaves when they could. They wanted to free a lot more. The reason they couldn't was because the laws were so draconian then that freeing slaves was absurdly expensive, illegal, and just plain impossible. So it was tough luck for you if you wanted to free your slaves and you were born into a plantation. That was your lot in life, unless you just picked up and moved somewhere else where there was no slavery. The Clintons needed the Sally Hemmings hoax around to soften the blow and to try to lessen the slack that he got for his extramarital affairs. And Hillary, of course, would have advantages with that too, because she didn't want to let go of the status of being First Lady. And then eventually, first U.S. President, first U.S. woman president, which is the most important thing to her. Her sexism, gender pandering knows no bounds, as she displays in the rest of this interview.
I admire Margaret Sanger being a pioneer in trying to empower women to have some control over their bodies, and I deplore statements that you have referenced. That is the way we often are when we look at flawed human beings. There are things that we admire and things we deplore. We have for 8 years followed the policy that you have described, and I think we've gone backwards. We've gone backwards in the real, genuine care that we have given to women. I admire you for raising 5 strong daughters who will be able to make their own choice, and most likely, given your guidance, will be very staunchly pro-life. But that is a choice that they will be able to exercise as free, independent American women. That's what I want for all women.
Hillary Clinton didn't even have the decency to refer to this interview as children as his children. It had to be daughters and girls, strong daughters, who were now able to make choices thanks to people like Margaret Sanger. Well, what if the guy had sons too? Oh, but I guess they don't matter. If anyone did this and replaced women with men, females with males, girls with boys, daughters with sons, they would be labeled as a misogynist, they would be labeled as committing hate speech, and there would be lynch mobs clamoring for their heads. Post-Thomas Jefferson and pre-Margaret Sanger, there was a woman who was very empowered for her era. She didn't let anyone push her around or get in her way. She didn't let life knock her around. She did what she wanted no matter what. She had power and she was strong-willed. Her name? Delphine LaLaurie. Career? Slave owner. A very brutal one at that. In fact, I consider people like her human refuse. I don't know how people like her were ever allowed to exist. They are just so bad. Now everybody knows that slavery was cruel by default, but within the slave system there were people that were more cruel than others, and Delphine was among the more cruel. In fact, she was so cruel that she was featured as a segment on Deadly Women, a TV crime series. It's a very, very disturbing series. Nonetheless, I recommend seeing it, although you have to have a pretty strong stomach, but it does educate people on the fact that women are not so powerless and weak-minded as the liberal media and people like Hillary would like you to think. Women can be just as brutal, just as power-hungry, just as ambitious, and as dangerous as men when they really want something bad enough, and if they have the sadistic heart to just go after it, not caring who they plow over in the process. But when Hillary condemned slavery, she didn't mention Delphine LaLaurie. Could it be that Hillary Clinton did not know about Delphine LaLaurie? Or maybe she did and didn't want to say anything because that would totally blow her gender jag all to pieces.
If you vote for somebody on the merits, one of my merits is I'm a woman.
For all of Hillary's talking about being a woman as a merit to being a U.S. president, Delphine LaLaurie disproves that by being a woman without merit. But females get away with this sexism, and they know it. For Hillary Clinton, it is not about making America a good place for everyone to live. It is about giving advantages to a select group of people based on gender. It is all about girl power. Girls, women, daughters, females. That is what it's all about for Hillary, including being the first woman president of the United States, as if that was something that should be praised. I'm not saying we shouldn't be proud of it. Anybody who is a good president should be proud if they are a good president. But nobody should think that gender is some kind of a merit and that we should be making such a big deal over, oh, look at this woman, she got to be president. Oh, now we are finally caught up with the rest of civilization or some such crap. No, 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 no. We should be way beyond that. Who cares if Hillary is a woman? She shouldn't care. Nobody else should care. And she certainly shouldn't be campaigning based on gender. This is disgusting. For all of the wonderful qualities that the likes of David Duke, Margaret Sanger, and Robert C. Byrd are supposed to have, according to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, there are those of us around who have the good qualities without the racism, the sexism, or any other kind of shallow-mindedness. So Robert C. Byrd, Margaret Sanger, and David Duke do not deserve this praise. The bad outweighs the good. Now, Hillary did this big song and dance about Thomas Jefferson and slavery and that kind of stuff. Well, that was a long time ago. That was ages ago. Thomas Jefferson could not help being born on a plantation. If that's where he was born, you couldn't fault him for that. People don't get to choose where they're born. But Margaret Sanger and Robert C. Byrd's racism and David Duke's are much more recent than the plantation days. Racism is racism, whether it's slavery or not. Simply put, if you don't want to be called out as a racist or sexist, put away, better still, bury the race-sex card.